I've been talking about cults for a very long time, and I've made my living off of pointing out propaganda when I see it. But what is propaganda? How is it defined? How can you identify it? And how do you counter it? I generally try to avoid politics, but I see the same thing coming from political figures and movements that I see coming from cults, so I feel duty-bound to address it. Let's get into it. So where'd the term propaganda originate? Interestingly enough, it came from the Catholic Church. It was a group of people sent out by the Pope to convert people. The root word is propagation. The actual group was called the propaganda. Now, propaganda has improved over the centuries, so what they did back then is pretty different from what we do now. And you can see a lot of propaganda in advertising. But when people's lives are on the line, like with cults or politics, propaganda can get particularly insidious. So let's take a look at some propaganda techniques that cults and politicians tend to use. The first one I want to cover is called firehosing, aka fire hose of falsehood. Firehosing is a version of something called the Gish Gallop. Most atheists in my audience are probably familiar with that term. That's when somebody spouts off as many claims as they can in as short of a window as possible during a debate, because they know their debate partner won't be able to address all of them. And when the debate partner can't get to all the claims, they're assumed to be true. Firehosing is basically the same thing, laying out as many quote-unquote facts as possible in as short a time as you can. But with firehosing, the goal is to spread it through as many channels as possible. People are more likely to believe something they've heard before, even if it's completely false and has no evidence to back it up. For example, if Donald Trump claims, say, he did more for the black community than any other president since Abraham Lincoln, that's easy to dismiss. But when you hear other sources repeating it, evidence or not, you're more likely to believe it. That's why Trump encourages news networks and people to repeat what he says. There really isn't a better example of firehosing inside the US. There are known counter strategies to basically counteract most propaganda techniques. The countermeasure to firehosing is to repeat the counter information, provide an alternative story to fill in the gaps and errors, warning people about the propaganda before it's presented, showing how the propaganda technique works, and turning off the flow of the fire hose by disabling the propagandist's method of spreading it. Twitter has been Donald Trump's go-to propaganda medium lately, but we saw Twitter turn on the fact-check feature for a tweet he sent recently about vote by mail being rife with fraud, which is objectively untrue. It didn't disable his ability to spread it, but it acted as a warning to people who didn't realize what it was. But this stuff doesn't just apply to Donald Trump. If that comparison leaves a bad taste in your mouth, then think about how Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormonism, and Scientology use these techniques to their advantage too. The next form of propaganda I want to cover is called name-calling or stereotyping. The propagandists will give names to something or somebody so that anytime people hear the term, they associate it with something negative. Think tree hugger or special interest group. Anytime somebody advocates for environmentalism or warns that drilling for oil in the Gulf of Mexico might be dangerous, or we need stricter regulations or something like that, the propagandists will call them a tree hugger. Or if they hear any dissent or disagreement at all, Jehovah's Witnesses will call somebody an apostate. It instantly leaves a bad taste in their mouth. Here's a list of other examples: Lion Ted, Sleepy Joe, Crooked Hillary, Corrupt Kane, Al Frankenstein, Low Energy Jeb, Foul-Mouthed Omar, Cheatin' Obama, Dummy Beto, Wacky Jackie, Little Marco, Brain Dead Bernie, Crazy Bernie, The Nutty Professor, Crazy Arnold, Impeachment Tom, Pocahontas, The Indian, Low IQ Maxine Waters, the list goes on. That's a really good example of the propagandistic technique. The next one I want to cover is called plain folks. The goal is to make people think you're just like them. It'll make people identify with you more, and it'll make them more likely to trust and support you. Presidents and cult leaders have been doing this since the beginning of time. They'll wear regular clothes, they'll use simple grammar and short sentences, and they'll post pictures of them doing things that a regular person would normally be doing, even if they have $1 billion in the bank and they don't need to, even if they hire somebody else to do that stuff for them. The picture is what's important. You see this a lot from Jehovah's Witnesses leadership. They'll post pictures of themselves knocking on doors, just like everybody else. They're obsessed with appearing to be normal Joes. Even if they have access to millions of dollars, they make the rules for millions of people, and they control them with an iron fist. It makes them more relatable and trustworthy, and people tend to fall for it. Even I've fallen for it, and my life has basically been devoted to identifying it. Nobody is immune to propaganda techniques. thinking you are makes you even more susceptible to them. The next one I want to mention is called an appeal to fear. On the BITE model, which if you're a longtime viewer you'll know is the model we use to identify cults, this propaganda technique is a form of emotional control. Instill irrational fears or phobias of questioning or leaving the group. If you don't accept X is true, something terrible will happen to you. What if I don't believe in God? Then you'll burn in hell forever. If we don't bail out the big automakers, the US economy will collapse. You think in terms of possibilities, not probabilities. It's possible that if I walk out of my house to check the mail, a car could run off the road and hit me. Is it likely? No. I don't even have to cross this street to get to my mailbox. But it's possible. A propagandist would lean into the possibility, not the probability. The next one I want to look at is called the bandwagon. A propagandist will try to convince you to accept what they're saying, or you'll miss out on something really good, something that everybody else is enjoying. It appeals to FOMO, fear of missing out. Another technique is called preemptive framing. It's similar to the logical fallacy called poisoning the well. Poisoning the well is where irrelevant, adverse information is preemptively presented to somebody with the intention of discrediting or ridiculing something the person is about to say. For example, a politician will discredit their opponent's entire energy plan by saying they've donated millions to oil companies. He's going to present his energy plan, but he can't be trusted. Now, no matter what the opponent says, it'll be discredited. You've effectively destroyed their reputation on that subject, even if what you said isn't true. Even if they've fought oil companies since day one. Doesn't matter. People heard it, and at least some of them believed it. That's similar to the preemptive framing propaganda technique. You're providing a narrative on a subject before your opponent has a chance to. When Robert Mueller finished his Russia probe, Bill Barr, the Attorney General, released a 2-page summary which had objectively false information in it, and it put a very specific spin on it. Whether the Russia probe was a waste of time or not is irrelevant. It's an example of preemptive framing. The Mueller report contains some useful and concerning information in it, but it was all pushed to the side because the original narrative was presented from a specific perspective. Here's another. Diversion. When something serious is happening, something that could bury the propagandist, they do something equally as controversial, but that'll get them more support. I'm sorry, like I said, I try to avoid politics if I can, but there just isn't a better example right now. If Donald Trump suggests people use cleaning supplies for something for which they aren't intended, he's lost the narrative. The attack is out of his control, and he has no way of winning back the narrative because what he said was just stupid, and everybody knows it. It makes international headlines for how stupid it is. So he does something really controversial to detract from the flub and moves on, like expressing support for protesters with ties to extremist groups, or using derogatory language about a minority group, something like that. Now everybody's completely forgotten about his disinfectant flub because they're all focused on the fact that he's making racial tensions in the US even worse. And here are my two final examples of propaganda techniques: the Ad Hominem Attack and the Quoque attack. Ad Hominem is where you attack somebody's character instead of addressing their arguments. Jehovah's Witnesses do this when they talk about apostates. They say any criticisms of the religion are just apostate lies. Never mind addressing them, just attack the messenger at any cost. They aren't worthy of addressing. And finally, the Quoque attack is when the propagandist will accuse the other person of using propaganda or logical fallacies in response to the accusation, like an appeal to hypocrisy. I'm using propaganda? No, you're using propaganda. I'm using a logical fallacy? No, you're using a logical fallacy, aka the no you attack, or the no you fallacy. We aren't talking about me, we're talking about you. Sometimes these propaganda techniques are combined. You'll see cult leaders firehosing claims about apostates, stoking unfounded fears about them, and using the opportunity to control information. If you listen to what they have to say, Satan will possess you and you'll lose everything you love. If you do listen to criticism on the group and you get in trouble for it, who's actually taking what you love from you? The cult leaders are. Hearing criticisms shouldn't inspire fear. Certainly not fear of losing everything you love, as Jehovah's Witnesses do. Propaganda is used all the time in politics, in cults, and in advertising, interestingly enough. The way to counteract most of these is to teach people about propaganda and how it works, to repeat the counter-narrative, and to limit the propagandist's ability to spread it. But limiting the propagandist's means of spreading it is a lot easier said than done. Most of the time, they have their own communication methods. And even if they didn't, should we? It's a serious conversation we should all be having. One of the biggest red flags I watch for with cults is whether or not they have a private, unmonitored communication method established for their groups. Jehovah's Witnesses used to have a watchtower and a wake, which was passed out to the public at doors. Now they have a study edition and a public edition of the watchtower. The study edition, as they call it, isn't given to the public. It's a members use only thing. I'm not saying that should be banned. It absolutely should not. But the fact that it exists is a red flag for me. The fact that they've established a method of communication which they use to espouse ideas that they don't want the public to see or criticize is extremely concerning. There's usually a point in time as cults form when they create that means of private communication hidden from the public. Sometimes they don't mind it if members see the crazy shit they say, sometimes they do. Here's my opinion on it. I don't think we, as a society, should limit propagandists' method of communication. I strongly believe in freedom of speech. It's the whole reason why I can sit here and say what I say whenever I want. It's an important value. So I want people to be able to say what they want to say, full stop. That being said, one of the methods of stifling propaganda's effectiveness is to present the counter-narrative. So I think if we're talking about the best method to prevent propaganda from working, but to maintain people's First Amendment rights, I think social media platforms should leave people's tweets and posts up. Allow them to say what they want to say. Treat them the same as anybody else, but provide objective, proven, verified information about what they're saying to counter the narrative that's being presented. Dealing with cults and propaganda like I do, and like I have been for years, can very easily involve violating people's First Amendment rights. Decades ago, cult deprogrammers used to kidnap cult members, bring them to a cabin in the woods, and proceed to deprogram them over the course of days, weeks. That'll do the trick, most of the time. It works. But how many laws and how many human rights are violated during that process? Deprogramming cult members and dealing with propaganda is pretty straightforward. There's really nothing to it. The hard part is respecting people's human rights in the process. Is it worth it if it means you lose your humanity in the process? The hallmark of a cult is the ends justify the means mindset. If we take on that mindset to fight the group, what did we really accomplish? If we become the thing we fight, is it even worth it? No. The answer is no, it's not. So through all of this, we need to remember people's rights and find ways to battle the propaganda while respecting them, or we might as well not bother battling it in the first place. Let me give a direct answer to a direct question. Should Twitter censor Donald Trump's tweets? No, they shouldn't take them down. However, adding a counter-narrative to them that people will see if they read his propaganda is a good way to battle it. I don't believe it's violating freedom of expression to point out when somebody is using false claims or false information. Anyways, that's all I've got for you. If you like what I do and you want to see me continue to do it, you can check me out on Patreon. That's probably the best way. If you want to get something back for your support, you can check out my Teespring or my Etsy store. I sell these signs on Etsy, so if you don't want Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons coming to your door at all hours of the morning on weekends, then get this. They're not afraid of anything except one thing: apostates. I've also added a new product to my store. Obviously, 2020 is a complete dumpster fire. If you want to express your disdain for the year 2020, you can do it by getting one of my dumpster fire candle holders. I sell them in black, blue, and rainbow. I also sell standard ones, not just 2020 ones. The rainbow one is $3 more than the others, so in honor of Pride Month, I'm donating $6 per sale, which is roughly all of the profits, for the rainbow dumpster fire candle holders to the Trevor Project. I'll be publishing my rainbow dumpster fire candle holder sales to my website, telltaleatheist.com, and I'll publish a donation there too, for transparency's sake. And that's not all I have for sale on the Etsy store, so give it a look if you're interested. Links are in the description and in the pinned comment as always. Okay, thanks for watching, guys.